emotional when I say that because I just remember, I can just see his face and the way he expressed that and his gratitude for God allowing him to go fight for his country.
Good morning and welcome to the Wimp to Warrior podcast. Yes, I'm a little croaky this morning, but we are pressing on because I have an amazing guest with us today, Miss Karen Vaugh. And Karen has, golly, so many titles, Karen. Best-selling author of an amazing book, World Changer. She's been on the national stage many times. Very well known in a lot of circles, a lot of nonprofit circles, Karen. You're part of the American Warrior Initiative. You have your own nonprofit, Operation 300. And we're going to get started today because on the Wimp to Warrior podcast, we talk a lot about mindsets and we talk about how do you go from being Wimp to Warrior. You know, Karen, I think you were born a warrior, but you've overcome some challenges. And so I want to talk about with you today, and I guess I should say, welcome, Karen.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Louise. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's such an honor. You know, when I hear your story on the national stage, and I hear it a lot. The thing I want to focus on today is having a purpose and a calling to a cause. And sometimes that happens when we're young in life and we feel this calling to something. But then there are other times that there are circumstances, something happens, and then we realize that calling. And I don't need to talk much today because Karen, our audience, maybe they're wondering what their calling is and how do they know their calling. And I'd just like you to share a little bit about you, a little bit about Billy, your husband, and of course, Aaron, your son, your family. But tell us about your calling and about that when you discover your why and your purpose.
Yeah, so Louise, I kind of believe that I was alive, but I didn't really live until about 2012, to be honest. Till I was about 50 years old, I didn't really live. And what I mean by that is I kind of just went through mundane routines. I had a life that was very comfortable, very satisfying. I had 3 beautiful children, a long, enduring marriage. I've been married 42 years now. And we just kind of coasted through life. And, I remember I was always the happy person just posting all the great things about my life. You know what I mean? Just like that. And it really wasn't being superficial. It was just that I was really genuinely just a happy-go-lucky person with really no purpose. And I remember thinking many times, man, was I created for anything important? Because I don't feel it. I don't feel a calling to it. And then our lives just radically changed in 2011. And what happened was we lost our firstborn child and our only son, Aaron. He was killed in action in Afghanistan in the shoot-down of Extortion 17, which ended up being a piece of history. It was the largest loss of life in the history of the entire 20 plus years of war on terror. Aaron was a Navy SEAL, a member of SEAL Team 6. And, he had lived his whole life. We can talk more about that a little bit later, but he had lived his whole life waiting for the mission he died on. If you want to say somebody goes out in a blaze of glory, Aaron freaking went out in a blaze of glory.
Yes, he did, Karen.
He wouldn't have had his life any other way. Of course, it was crippling for us, right? And I'm a woman of faith. Our family is full of faith. My son loved Jesus. Thank God for that because I know where he is, and that was my immediate comfort on the morning that I found out that he had been killed. Over 7,000 miles away from all of us who loved him, 7,000 miles away from everyone he loved. He was a husband and had 2 little babies at home, and so we kind of talk about August 6, 2011 as our life before and after. It's almost like when Jesus died, right? It's before and after because everything is marked by that date in history. Even when we're just having family conversations, we're like, oh, that was before Aaron died. Aaron was still, because it's just such a marker in history. What happened was we didn't get to grieve privately. We didn't get to even really just grieve like most people grieve the loss of a child. We were thrown onto the national stage and had to grieve very publicly. And I say have to because that's the first time I understood what God had created me for. And it was funny that it came through the death of my child. God had created me to be a voice for America, a voice for freedom, a voice for patriotism, a voice to fight for the founding principles that this nation was built on. Aaron fought kinetically. He went into battle and fought for America because he believed in it and he loved it, and that's what he felt called to do from the time he was a little boy. But then God called me to fight culturally. And by fighting culturally, I actually had the great blessing and still continue to have the great blessing of keeping Aaron kind of alive, if that makes sense, because millions and millions and millions of people have now heard his story. They've heard about his faith, they've heard about his grit, and more importantly, they've heard about his love for this country and what drove him to do what he did. So, you have a choice when you go through something like that. You can get on the couch and nobody would blame you if you do. That's just the way it is. Everybody would understand and pat you on the back and coddle your grief. Or you can get up and have a life and create some purpose from your loss. And we were determined as a family to not be people who allowed our loss to have no value. He meant too much. He was too large of a person to allow that loss to just have nothing in value. So that's kind of my story, how I got here.
Aaron had a purpose. He had a calling. You watched him, and you didn't really like his calling, did you? And you didn't.
It kind of seemed like a joke, honestly, Louise, when an 8-year-old boy says, "I want to be a Navy SEAL when I grow up." You kind of just pat him on the back and say, "Yes." And you also want to be Superman. And, you just kind of treat it with a little chuckling, laughter. But Aaron, every time you talked to him about it, he was serious. He meant it. And if you'd like me to tell that story, I'd be happy to.
I do. I would love, because you know what? The people who are listening to this podcast, I know you and I share this story as we travel together around the nation, but the podcast listeners may have never heard that. And I'm just saying, Aaron didn't fall. That apple didn't fall far from the tree, because
Nice
you are called to a purpose and you're pretty hard fast on it. But Aaron always had that dream of being a Navy SEAL, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old. And then he gets to high school and...
Yeah, so he ended up being just to make you understand why we laughed about it. Aaron was a scrawny, skinny, string bean tall boy. He was 6'4", weighed about 120 pounds, soaking wet, like his freshman, sophomore year in high school. He was awkward. He had a size 13 and a half foot, so he just didn't seem like the kind of person who would do that sort of physical thing. He had allergies. He, went through about a year of worrying that he had cancer. You know what I mean? He wasn't just this reeking, beaming picture of health, stud little boy. You know what I mean? He was sickly, and he was tall and skinny, and and he really was just a big goofball. So it was hard to take him seriously. But like you said, all through his life, he kept saying this. And, we believe now, reflecting back and reflecting with him before he passed away, that it was a calling God had put on his heart. It wasn't something he had decided. It was something God had put in his heart. And as I tell you more of the story, you'll understand just how seriously I am about that, or how serious I am about that statement. So he gets in high school, and even though he's skinny, he ends up being a really good wide receiver, those long, goofy monkey arms, and long legs. And he ends up really, becoming somebody kind of prominent on the football field. And then he was so tenacious. He was such a fighter because he was such an underdog all the time because of his size and everything, and his lack of weight, that he ended up playing defense too, a defensive end, and he ended up being like a really superior defensive end. By the time he was a junior in high school, he was being looked at by some colleges, and not big ones. I'm not talking about big schools, but I'm talking about small schools. And it was the first time that he said, before I become a Navy SEAL, I might play some college football, because that would be a really cool thing, to tell my kids about. So that was the only thing that ever made him think that there would be an inch of space between graduating high school and becoming a Navy SEAL. It's all he wanted to do. Everything that he did, every preparation he made, it was all to become a Navy SEAL. And so, his senior year of football, the Thursday night practice right before the first game of that season, he made a wrong move on his leg and he obliterated the anterior cruciate ligament in his left knee. It tore all the other ligaments. Long story short, he had reconstructive surgery, went through a great deal of rehab, worked so hard now not to play college football because he knew that was probably over, but now it was just to get himself prepped to become a Navy SEAL. And so if this means anything to athletes out there, within 6 months, at 6'4" tall, he was running a 4.440 with a replaced ACL. He was extreme in everything he did, Louise. Everything he did, he was extreme.
He was.
I mean, whether it was laughter or fighting or playing football, it was extreme. And so whether it's training, and so he recovered, and actually his coaches were so impressed with his recovery that they started sending letters to the colleges that were interested, saying, hey, this kid's good to go. And that he started getting some more recruiting letters and calls. And so right before school let out, right before he graduated, he was playing a pickup game of basketball with some friends, came down wrong on that knee and obliterated it again. So we found, both times we found one of the best surgeons. It's easy down here in Florida with all the sports teams. We found one of the best sports surgeons down here, and he went in and he loved Aaron. He loved his spirit. He'd done the first surgery. He came out about 2 hours into the surgery and he said, Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, I really have something bad to tell you. He said, there is nothing we can do to repair Aaron's knee. It's just too destroyed. He said, there's no place to attach a new anterior cruciate ligament to. And then he said these, he said a lot more, but then he said these words that I'll never forget. He said he is going to spend the rest of his life somewhat handicapped and will never be able to do anything physical again without the use of a special brace.
So I just have to, at this moment, to the people who are listening to this podcast, you may have heard some news like Aaron and Billy and Karen heard, where a professional gives you the news, and you think it's the end of the world. Aaron never felt that way, did he, Karen?
Well, he had a moment. He took a minute. When he woke up from the anesthesia and we shared that news with him, he was devastated. He had never made any plan except to do what he was going to do, and now he knew he would never be a Navy SEAL, and it was devastating. Now, his faith, I believe that it was his faith in Jesus. I believe it was the tenacity that was inborn in him. He didn't give up on life, but he did give up on his dream. He knew that was over. And so he didn't know what to do.
So there was that minute. There was a minute.
And, we had moved him to Florida during his junior year in high school. And so, he was really struggling, and he asked if he could go home the last 6 weeks of high school and graduate with his friends he'd grown up with in West Tennessee. And so we gave him that, just for some healing time. Went back and lived with my parents for 6 weeks and graduated at O'Brien Central High School in Troy, Tennessee, with all the
And
people.
He took another job and was doing really good at it.
Graduates high school, and he took a job with a prestigious golf course down here. And they liked him so much that they put him through college. And so now he's he graduated high school at 17. So by the time he was 20, he was on a completely different trajectory. He had golf course management education. He was being scouted by some golf courses in the Carolinas and really heading to a very lucrative career. And then came 9/11.
I was going to say, but then. So tell us about the but then.
Right. And, we didn't know what was going on in his heart. We gathered together as a family, just like everybody else in this nation, and grieved what we were witnessing, and I just always encourage people to go back and watch videos from 9/11, just so you can remember and still be angry about it, and still be serious about it, and still understand what it cost this nation over the next 20 years. We didn't know what was going on in his heart, but something was brewing in there that was a righteous anger. He came home on his 21st birthday after work, and he sat down at the dinner table with Billy and I, and he said, Mom and Dad, I stopped by the neighbor. Now, this was completely out of the blue. He had not said a word about this, okay? This is June, 9/11, September to June. He had not said a word. In June, he sits down on his birthday and he says, I stopped by the Navy recruiter's office on the way home from work, and I joined the SEAL Challenge program. And you could have heard a pin drop in our house. And we really couldn't even speak for a few minutes because remember, all the time that he was growing up and wanted to do this, we had never been at war, right? Vietnam was over. There were no real engagements. There were some, but there were no engagements that we knew would put him on the battlefield. But now we were at war and people were already dying. So it was a very solemn and serious thing to hear. And I mean, my mind was kind of reeling, and Billy's was too. And Billy finally says, well, son, he broke the silence, and I mean, there was like a long pause, like a long, really awkward, and Aaron was just solemn enough that he didn't feel it. He didn't fill that space with anything. And I think that's a key thing for warriors to do, is just let the silence sit for a minute and see what the response is going to be, right? He didn't fill the space. He just sat there, and finally Billy spoke, and he said, well, son, you'll never make it. What about your knee? And he didn't say it to be funny. He was serious. And Aaron said, Dad, I have always known that this is what I was supposed to do with my life. God is telling me to go do it. And if God is telling me to go do it, I'm going to make it. And so then there was that silence again. Nobody filled it. And finally I thought, it's my turn. I said, well, does the Navy know about your knee? And he said, oh no, or they'd have never let me in the program, and don't you say a word. So remember, he had to go to SEAL training without the ability to even tape his knee because it would have given away his injury. And everybody knows. I mean, if you don't know, just Google SEAL training. It's the most rigorous training in the entire military process. There is nothing more elite. There's nothing that's more physically strenuous. And he didn't just make it. 157 men started in his BUDS class, and 7 of them finished, and Aaron was one of them. He got his name on a wall that's listed first time, every time, which holds the names of the few men in history who completed every single evolution required of them the first time they tried it. He was on that wall. It didn't make any sense. So now there's a lot more training that goes on after they complete BUDS, but remember, every single time through the years, and backing up, remember, he also made it to SEAL Team 6, where I don't know what the statistics are, but I think like 7% of the SEALs who try out for SEAL Team 6 make SEAL Team 6. Aaron went straight through Green Team and became a member of SEAL Team 6 and was chosen for a 2-troop and Gold Squad, which was just a fantasy for him. I mean, just really elite, the elite of the elite. They call it the tip of the spear. And so what I want to say about that, though, is every single time that he and I would talk, and we had this thing we did through our whole life, and Louise, you've heard this story many times, but the greatest blessing that I have to hold on to is that we talked through his whole life. From the time he was a little boy, we would sit up late at night when everybody else went to bed, and we would have those heart-to-hearts. We'd talk about, things that hurt, things that were funny, things we loved, things we hated. We'd cry together, we would laugh together. We had those talks frequently, every single time he came home from a deployment for the next 9 years, which he died on his 5th deployment. But every single time he came home, after any training, after any post-deployment relief, we would sit up and have one of those nights. We had it the last time we were together on Earth. The same kind of conversation, set up till 2:30 or 3. Everyone else was asleep by 10:30 or 11, and that was Aaron and I's time. And every single time, without fault, at some point in those conversations, he would say something like this to me: Mom, I can't believe God has let me do this. Because he always knew it was only God. I mean, it always makes me emotional when I say that, because I just remember, I can just see his face and the way he expressed that and his gratitude for God allowing him to go fight for his country in the way he had always wanted to go take a chance of dying. I mean, he would say it with so much passion. He just loved the concept of freedom so much. He loved the Constitution. He believed that a representative republic was the noblest form of government ever devised by man, and it deserved to be protected. And it deserved for men and women to lay their lives down to protect it if need be. And he was so grateful that he had gotten to take his place in history. And so I say that to say, on August 6th, when we got that call that he had died during the night, and it's really difficult to talk about that morning, but when we found out that he had died, I remember thinking instantly, he was exactly where he was created to be. at the exact time he was created to be there, doing exactly what he was created to do. No other explanation for what he achieved and what he did. None but God.
Well, Karen, I've heard that story so many times, but every time I hear it out of your mouth, I am struck again. The patriotism that he had on serving this country, that was really placed in him as a small child. And I think about those who are listening that have ignored that call for so many years. And he did push it down for a minute. He got the news. In other words, there's always someone going to tell you can't do it. Now, he had his dad tell him he couldn't do it.
And right after he said it, he's like, "What are you doing?"
It's like Billy goes, "What? You'll never make it." But
He actually said, Louise, I need to tell you this. Billy actually said to him, he goes, "Son, if you don't make it as a SEAL, you're still going to be on a ship, right?" Because that's not what he wanted to do. He's like, "I'm going to make it. Don't worry about it, Dad." It was basically like, that's not a question.
But he had that confidence once he got the call. He had that
Right.
period of time. So to those listening, there is that period of time where maybe something happens and you feel like, well, the call went away. There's a scripture that says the call of God is irrevocable when God puts a call out there. And Karen, going to you, because I believe there's a call on your life. And you said you lived those years, and but you sang in groups. You were a singer. I mean, you're an entertainer, girl. You are an entertainer. I've been out to eat with you, and you're fun. Okay,
You don't have to eat with me when I'm drinking, Louise. So
But when you talked about Aaron being full of fun and laughing, I think about his mama being full of fun and laughing. But that call for you, I'm just going to say, I know you felt the call to share to America what is the cost of freedom. And you can truly share this is the cost, because the average American does not understand. But I know this, that call has not been easy for you either, has it?
Oh no. I mean, you see, every time I tell the story, it's been 11 years. Every time I tell the story, it breaks me. I mean, losing, look, I think this all the time. I think like with grief, when, like I said earlier, people have a right to get in bed when they've lost a child. They do, they have a right. But just because something is okay doesn't mean it's beneficial. And you have to make that mental adjustment. You have to say, okay, I remember one of the first things that I thought is, this was literally, okay, two things came to my mind instantly. The moment I got the phone call that Aaron was gone, two things came to my mind instantly. We do not grieve as those who have no hope. I started repeating scripture back to God. I started telling him that his promise better be true, that I needed to be able to have hope. And then my second thought was, I have to stay okay for my family. If I crumble, all of them will. If I give up, all of them will. And I just had that clarity of mind. And I think like you said, maybe that's something bred in me. Maybe it's the way I was raised. I had a really, tough dad. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just meant he was always like, go get him, Tiger. Like he anytime things difficult would happen in my life, he would just be basically like, it's, that's usually based around mean people, right? And he would say, screw him, but he wouldn't use that nice of a word, but I mean, that was his mentality, is just, hey, you be you always be you, and you keep fighting. There's nothing that can keep you down except you. And that was kind of how I was raised, right? And, my mom was a very strong, independent woman as well. And so I just think my founding gave me a lot of that. And then my faith gave me a lot of that, just to get up, because I think that, it doesn't matter what the hard thing is. And people say to me all the time, oh, I never could do what you do. Well, you don't know that. First off, you don't know that. And I hope you never have to find out. That's my two thoughts that come to my mind. I hope you never have to find out. But whatever it is, people go through, for a while it was, I would classify, when people would say things that were hurting them, I would classify in my mind, you don't know anything about pain. That would go through my mind, just being brutally honest. You don't know anything about pain. Please shut up. Your cat died. Okay. All right. Like that, like I would feel that way, and I would feel a little bit of anger and, like, what are you even talking about? But then I remembered how I was before Aaron died. Things were traumatic to me that shouldn't have been. And so I got really good about compartmentalizing that thought and remembering that, hey, whatever the trauma is a person is experiencing, it's real to them. Now here's the goal. Whatever your trauma is, get over it and make something from it. That's just really it. And you don't ever get over losing a child, obviously. Louise, you know you've lost a child as well. You don't get over it, but you can make it count. And so my biggest thing that I really, really hate is people allowing themselves to become a victim to what's happened to them. I really, really hate that. And the reason is I don't hate the person. I hate what they're allowing because I know what it's causing in their life. I know the victories they're losing because they're allowing victimhood to reign over their pain. All of us have been a victim to something. And you can say losing a child, you're not a victim, but you could be. You could say, I have a right to quit. Nobody should ever have to bury a kid. No one should have to. But the truth is, whatever it is that you've been challenged with, if you make a mental decision that it will not take you, you will take it, you will do fine. And you will go forward. And that's just the thing. It's all right here. Aaron used to tell me all the time, I watched him overcome the unimaginable, right? And he used to say, Mom, pain is in your mind. It's not in your body, it's in your mind, and you have control over your mind. And so I live by that motto now. Whatever it is, I don't have to allow it to control me. I control it, and I tell it what direction it's going to cause my life to travel in. And I just think that, like, if you're talking Wimp to Warrior, I love the name of your podcast. You're talking Wimp to Warrior. That's the key thing. That's the key thing, is controlling your mind. And the Bible teaches us that over and over again, to control your thoughts, to take them captive. And I use that scripture a lot after his death. Take every thought captive and make it obedient to what God tells you about yourself, what God tells you about your direction and your path and who you are in him. And so I made it obedient. Was it always easy? Were there days I got in bed and cried all day? Were there times I collapsed in the shower and sobbed like a hysterical animal? Yes, but I would take it captive. I wouldn't let it put me in chains. I would put it in chains, if that makes sense.
I love that, what you just said, Karen. You take the thought and you control it. It doesn't control you. And that's, as you said, that's what Wimp to Warrior is about, not wimping out. And folks, losing a child is the very worst thing that can happen to a human being. It is the very worst thing. And when you take what Karen has gone through and losing a child, and it was not just, there were 29 others that were lost on that helicopter that went down, the largest loss of Navy SEAL life, and then to be thrown into the public spotlight. But just real quick, as we're finishing up, Karen, you were actually invited to the national stage with the Republican National Convention to speak about, your voice helped change some laws.
Right. So, the primary thing that threw us into the national spotlight was that we found out what was happening in the war with rules of engagement. The rules of engagement had become very counterproductive. That's an understatement to say that. They had become actually so dangerous for the U.S. warriors who were over there fighting. They favored our enemy, and they put our warriors at such grotesque risk. And so we found that out very much by accident. The shoot down had a lot of questions that surrounded it. If you Google Extortion 17, you'll see millions of hits about it, a lot of suspicion about what happened that night, but it made us start examining why it happened. Why were they on an antiquated helicopter? Why were SEAL Team 6 members flown into a battle zone in an antiquated helicopter that was built in the 50s? Why? Nobody expects that. And so we ran across this webpage, and this is how it all happened. Ran across this webpage where we found out that due to rules of engagement, good rules of engagement for Americans, in the first 7.5 years of war in Afghanistan, we had lost 630 U.S. troops. In the next 3 years, that number had raised to 1,800 in less than half the time. The wounded in action numbers were more staggering. So then we started saying, why? Why has this raised by 1,300 in half the time? 1,300 more died in half the time. And we got to the bottom of it. It was rules of engagement. That administration had created such lax rules of engagement. Things like this. And these are things people need to know so that it never happens again. Things like this. We had warriors come to us constantly when we started speaking out publicly about it, thanking us for talking about it, thanking us for being a voice about it. People talk a lot about rules of engagement now, but 11 years ago, it was very taboo to talk about anything like that, to question what the military decisions were in a war zone. And we were very pro-military, so it was like cutting a tumor out of somebody you love because you love them. That's how we approached it. Not because you don't love them. And, we heard things like, I was going to retire in the military, but I got out because on my last deployment, we were told that the orders came down that from now forward, we could not shoot a combatant with an RPG aimed at our troops until he fired it. Those are the kind of things that we were dealing with. And so we started just screaming it from the rooftops. I mean, we had death threats. We were ostracized. I mean, it was a terrible thing to go through, but our vision was clear. We weren't going to shut up about it till it finally ended up. A woman called me during the debates for the 2016 primary election. And she said, "Hey, I just want you to know that because of you and Billy, not one, not two, but three of the candidates tonight were talking about rules of engagement." And I'm like, wow. And so then we met with Donald Trump and talked about rules of engagement. And of course, he was elected. And then I was invited to speak at the Republican National Convention that year to talk about a strong America. So yeah.
That terrible thing that happened to you, to your family, you lost Aaron. You have turned it, the scripture, all things work together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. I always say losing a child, it's only in heaven we're going to understand that, because it doesn't seem like anything can work for good. But I believe because of what you're doing, Karen, lives have been saved, and will be saved with your nonprofit. And I want you to tell me just real quickly as we're ending up about Operation 300, because this is one more calling in your life. So you're called to the American Warrior Initiative. That's the CEO. I'm the CEO of that, and you travel with me and you speak on the cause to freedom. You have a national platform on, not everything the government does is perfect, and when it's not perfect, people need to stand up and speak out, even when they get, as you said, a lot of pushback, a lot of challenges. But the third thing, Operation 300, I believe you're saving lives with this too.
Yeah.
Tell us why Operation 300 was started and what you're doing.
So Aaron left behind a widow and two little babies. Aaron's children, Reagan was almost 2 years old, and Chamberlain was 9 weeks old when Aaron died. And his widow, Kimberly, kept asking the same question over and over again: who's going to teach my kids the things Aaron would have taught them? She had expectations. She was married to a warrior. She had expectations of what her children's childhoods would be like. And so it developed in our hearts this concept of what if, and actually Tara, my oldest daughter, came up with it. She and her brother were extremely close, and she had wanted to do something to honor him since his death. And then finally this idea came to mind: what if we held extreme adventure camps for kids whose dads had died during this war, and we let them do things with male mentors, father-aged male mentors, that they would have done with their dad if he was still here. And the vision, we began with a camp of 9 kids who we couldn't believe their moms let them come and spend a weekend with people they didn't know. We put the widows up in a really nice hotel in West Palm Beach and gave them a weekend with people who they didn't have to explain themselves to. The kids were around other kids they didn't have to explain themselves to. And if I can I take just 1 minute and say something to Americans listening and watching this? Most people don't even think about this, but when a military spouse dies, the rest of the family is ejected from the military. So now the entire community that they have grown up in, that they have known, that they have identified with, that they have run with, they're gone. They're ostracized from it, and they go back to a community that may or may not respect anything that their father or mother gave, may or may not have any reverence for it at all, and may not have any empathy or sympathy for what they gave, or respect for what they gave. So you find a lot of depression inside military families whose loved one has died because of that very thing of you don't even seem to appreciate what we just gave you, And so we found that camaraderie was probably the most genuine thing that happened inside these families, and the camp has grown. We have multiple camps a year. We do retreats for Gold Star fathers, dads who've lost their children in war so that they can come together with other fathers. We do events where we take Gold Star families to Washington, D.C. and to New York, and we just honor them in places that are key to what caused their child to do what they did. And it's just been such a blessing. It's grown into a massive national nonprofit, Louise, especially thanks to companies like Fairway Mortgage and American Warrior Initiative who have helped support it. It's huge. You know, we bring in, I guess, multiple millions of dollars a year.
And I do
to
believe it's
fund and
saving
help
lives
our
because
families.
depression and a lot of post-traumatic stress on these children on losing their
100%.
father. So if someone wants to donate, what's the website, Karen?
Yeah, it's just op300.org, op300.org.
And people can go donate, and that money is going to go to help support a child to come to one of these camps. You have volunteers that come in and help support it. Karen, you're a hero in my book. I mean, I admire you so much. You've got courage, and your courage to press forth in the face of adversity and heartbreak, heart-crushing pain. You've done it anyway. Your calling and your purpose is making a difference in America. I do believe. People are sitting up, and where they might not listen to people like me, they'll listen to someone like you to say that is the cost of freedom. That is the true cost of freedom right there. So that we have a new respect for the men and women who serve this country, and we have and we honor the not just those who have given their lives, but the families who are left behind.
Yeah, yeah. Louise, you're
And
here.
your words today on Wimp to Warrior, I mean, girl, you preached it. I mean, you said it. Is taking control of those thoughts and not letting those
It
thoughts
is.
control you. Any final
Always.
words, Karen?
Yeah, just
Any final
Louise,
words?
thank you. You're a hero in my eyes, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't throw that word around lightly. You have taken a calling on your life to fight for those who fight for us, and I am honored to stand beside you, walk beside you in your mission, and I thank God continuously that I know you and get to call you my friend.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a great day. Thank you.